You look at two population estimates for literally the exact same species, and sometimes you just have to scratch your head.
Oh, absolutely. It can be completely baffling.
Right, because, okay, we have one report here, and this is rigorously compiled by the IUCN, and it suggests there are fewer than 1,000 mature individuals left.
Which is a terrifyingly low number.
Very low. But then you look at the other estimate, and this is an intensive field study by the Fitzpatrick Institute of African Ornithology, and their model suggests a potential population of nearly 89,000.
Yeah, that is not a small discrepancy.
Not at all. I mean, that isn't just a statistical margin of error. Those are two entirely different realities, basically coexisting in the exact same landscape.
Right. And it forces a real reckoning with, how we actually measure the natural world, because wildlife biology typically relies on observation.
Right. Like tagging or aerial counts, stuff like that.
Exactly. Tagging, acoustic monitoring, visual surveys.
Mm-hmm.
But when a subject's entire evolutionary trajectory is dedicated to basically being invisible,
those standard methodologies just kind of fall apart.
They completely collapse. I mean, the gap between 1,000 and 89,000, it really represents our fundamental inability to observe a creature that just refuses to be seen.
And that brings us to the mission for today's deep dive. We are essentially hunting a ghost today.
The Fynbos buttonquail.
Exactly. The Fynbos buttonquail, also known as Turnix hottentotus. And we're going to piece together its profile for you using those Fitzpatrick Institute surveys, some really detailed conservation assessments from BirdLife South Africa, and some amazing on-the-ground field data from the Overberg Crane Group.
It's a great stack of sources.
It really is, because our goal for you today is to figure out how an animal can be so perfectly adapted to its environment that top-tier scientists, people who do this for a living, can spend decades walking through its habitat and just never encounter a single one.
Yeah, and to understand that vanishing act, we really have to deconstruct its biology first. Mm-hmm. Because this isn't just a bird that, hides well in a bush. Its physical architecture is basically engineered for terrestrial evasion.
Terrestrial evasion, I like that.
Yeah, I mean, we are talking about an animal that is barely 14 to 15 centimeters long.
Which is what, the size of a smartphone?
Pretty much exactly the size of a smartphone. It weighs perhaps 40 to 60 grams.
That is incredibly tiny to be navigating what I imagine is some really dense, scratchy undergrowth.
Oh, it is. The Fynbos is no joke. But here is where it immediately throws a curveball at conventional avian biology.
Okay, unpack that for me.
Well, usually you expect the male bird to be the vibrant, conspicuous one, right?
Yeah, like the peacock displaying its feathers or the bright red cardinal singing on a branch.
Exactly.
Right.
Well, the female, she usually blends into the nest to avoid predators. But the Fynbos buttonquail utilizes what we call reversed sexual dimorphism.
Wait, really? So the male is the drab one?
Yes. The male is this drab, straw-colored bird, and he's completely streaked with dark barring.
To basically mimic dry grass and shadows.
Precisely. And the female, she actually carries the color.
Oh, wow. I love when nature just flips the script like that. What does she look like?
She's really quite beautiful if you ever manage to see one. She features these slate gray flight feathers that contrast with rich, buff wing coverts.
Nice.
And she has a bright orange rufous breast and a very distinctive rufous face.
Rufous being like a reddish-brown color, right?
Right, exactly. And those features are paired with striking peach or yellow eyes.
That sounds incredible. But it also sounds like a big ecological clue.
Oh, it's a massive clue. Mm-hmm. In ecological terms, reverse sexual dimorphism is basically a glaring neon sign pointing to a species' social and reproductive structure.
It tells us the behavioral script is completely inverted.
Exactly, which plays heavily into their overall survival strategy.
Okay, we're definitely going to dig into the mechanics of that inverted survival strategy a bit later, especially the nesting stuff, because it is wild. But let's look at their day-to-day movement first.
Or rather, their lack of movement.
Right, because they are strictly terrestrial. They live on the dirt.
Very much so.
And from what the sources say, their primary defense mechanism against a predator isn't to just fly away like a normal bird, but to sit incredibly tight.
Yeah. They basically just let that speckled rufous camouflage do all the work. They exhibit an extreme, almost pathological reluctance to fly.
It sounds like this bird treats flying the way I treat running for the bus. Like, it only does it as an absolute last resort in a total panic.
That is a perfect analogy. Because if a predator, or, say, a human observer, walks toward a typical bird, the breaking point, what we call the flush distance, is usually several meters.
Right, the bird sees you coming and bail.
Exactly. But the Fynbos buttonquail, it will hold its ground until an approaching boot is literally 1 to 2 meters away.
1 to 2 meters, you'd practically step on it.
You really would. It vastly prefers to scuttle. It lowers its center of gravity and just runs rapidly through the dense brush, slipping between the stalks of vegetation.
Which, if you think about it, makes total metabolic sense.
How so?
Well, for a 50-gram terrestrial bird, the energy expenditure required to vertically launch yourself out of dense brush has to be massive.
Oh, absolutely.
So scuttling is cheap, flying is expensive, and probably really dangerous.
Precisely. When they are finally forced to flush, it is an act of pure, frantic desperation.
Just explode upward.
Explode upward, and they flutter barely above the shrub line for maybe 30 meters.
30 meters, that's it.
That's it. And then they drop like a stone behind another bush. I mean, they do not soar. They do not glide.
It's like an escape pod trajectory.
Exactly. A 30-meter escape pod trajectory. And then they immediately resume scuttling on the ground.
So because observers only ever get this, 2 or 3 second look at a brown blur moving away?
Yeah, visual identification is notoriously unreliable.
Right. Observers probably misidentify them all the time.
All the time. They frequently confuse them with the common quail or the black-rumped buttonquail, which occupies overlapping territories in that region.
Okay, but here is a paradox that really stood out to me in the source material.
Okay, let's hear it.
The data shows this bird is locally nomadic, right? They track changing environmental conditions.
Yes, they do.
But if they hate flying so much and their aerial maneuverability is basically garbage, how are they navigating a landscape to find new habitats?
That's the big question.
Right, because the sources note they supposedly migrate locally at night. But the evidence cited for this is a documented record of one single bird flying into a window in a coastal town called Betty's Bay.
I know, it sounds a bit thin on paper.
It feels like a massive leap. Are we really extrapolating an entire nocturnal nomadic lifestyle from one bird hitting a pane of glass?
It does seem completely anecdotal in isolation, I'll give you that. But you have to synthesize that data point with the broader behavior of the Turnicidae family, which is their scientific family.
Okay.
And you also have to factor in the physics of the Fynbos environment itself.
Okay, break that down for me.
Well, diurnal flight, meaning flying during the day for a bird this size with such poor aerial maneuverability, is a literal death sentence.
Because of predators.
Exactly. The Fynbos canopy is heavily patrolled by raptors, black harriers, jackal buzzards, things like that.
Oh, wow. So a tiny buttonquail just slowly fluttering over the shrubs in broad daylight.
It would be intercepted immediately. It would be a free lunch.
Okay, that makes sense. So the Betty's Bay window incident isn't just the sole pillar of the theory.
No, it's the physical proof, validating the only logical strategy they actually have available to them.
Because if you can't outfly a hawk, you have to move when the hawk is sleeping.
Precisely. They are moving under the cover of darkness. And they are driven by shifts in rainfall and the changing architecture of the vegetation around them.
So they are basically forced into this nomadism because their required habitat is inherently unstable.
Yes, they are entirely tethered to the life cycle of the Fynbos biome.
Let's talk about that biome then, because the Fynbos is one of the most volatile ecosystems on the planet.
It truly is.
It's this Mediterranean climate shrubland down in the western and eastern Cape of South Africa.
Right. It's defined by these cool, wet winters and very hot, dry summers.
And it's famous for having incredibly nutrient-poor soil, right? But also this crazy hyperdiversity of plants.
Yes, it's dominated by these massive protea flowers and heath-like ericas and these leafless, reed-like plants called restios.
Right, the restios. We are going to talk a lot about those. But the engine driving this entire ecosystem isn't water or soil nutrients.
No, not at all.
It's fire.
It's entirely driven by fire. The Fynbos requires a very strict regime of burning to survive.
Which is wild to think about.
It is, but many of the plant species there are what we call serotinous.
Serotinous, what does that mean exactly?
It means they hold their seeds in these incredibly tough, fire-resistant cones. And those cones will only open in the intense direct heat of a wildfire.
Wow.
Yeah, and other plants actually require the chemical compounds found in smoke to trigger their germination.
So without fire, the ecosystem basically dies.
Exactly. It becomes senescent, it overgrows, it chokes itself out, and the biodiversity just crashes.
Okay, so bringing this back to the Fynbos buttonquail, they operate in this microscopic sliver of that fire cycle, right?
They do.
Because the Fitzpatrick Institute flush surveys prove they don't just live in any random Fynbos, they require a very specific Goldilocks zone.
A very strict Goldilocks zone. They need early successional Fynbos that burned exactly 2 to 5 years ago.
2 to 5 years. That is such a tight window.
It is. But think about the mechanics of that timeline. Year 0, immediately post-fire.
Right. The landscape is basically a moonscape of black ash.
Exactly. There is zero structural cover to hide from those harriers we talked about, and there is no seed bank accessible for foraging.
So a terrestrial bird absolutely cannot survive there.
Impossible.
That
But jump to year 2. The restios begin pushing these fresh, rigid shoots up through the soil.
Okay.
Small ericoid shrubs start to form. And the vegetation structure hits this very specific architectural state.
It's low.
Right, yes, roughly 30 to 70 centimeters high.
Hmm.
But crucially, it is sparse.
Sparse, meaning there's space to move.
That sparsity is the master variable here, because restios grow in these distinct clumps. They leave networks of essentially bare dirt between them.
Oh, I see. So it creates this labyrinth of open runways right at ground level.
Exactly. Runways shielded by a low, incomplete canopy above.
Which allows the buttonquail to scuttle freely without physical impediment while still remaining invisible from the sky.
You've got it perfectly.
Here's where it gets really interesting to me, though. We usually view wildfires as these catastrophic events that completely displace wildlife, right?
Oh, constantly. That's the common perception.
But you're saying this bird basically needs the landscape to burn just to create its perfect, sparse living room.
It absolutely does.
It's essentially an avian fire chaser.
That's exactly what it is. But because that living room only lasts a few years before the shrubs grow too thick, the bird is trapped in this state of perpetual eviction.
Perpetual eviction. Wow. So what happens at year 6 or 7?
Well, once you hit year 6 or 7 post-fire, the basal cover,
What's basal cover? Just so we are clear.
basically the sheer volume of plant stems physically meeting the soil.
Ah, okay.
That basal cover often exceeds 80%. So those bare dirt runways we talked about, they completely close up.
And for a bird that refuses to fly and navigates entirely on foot?
Thick, mature Fynbos is basically an impenetrable physical wall. They can't forage effectively, and they definitely can't run from ground predators.
So they have to abandon the territory entirely and go find a fresh burn scar.
Yes, they have no choice.
Now, for a long time, the prevailing wisdom among birders was simply to look for those restios, right?
Right.
The thought process was pretty simple. Find the reeds, find the bird.
But the recent data completely upends that idea.
Yeah, how so?
Because you can have a pristine, gorgeous field of restios, but if it hasn't burned in a decade, the carrying capacity for buttonquails is absolutely zero.
Because it's too thick.
Exactly. Time since fire totally overrides botanical composition.
Okay, but the researchers also uncovered a stark negative association with grass cover.
Yes, and this is a critical mechanical distinction.
Right, because Fynbos, in its natural, healthy state, contains very little grass.
Almost none. Now, restios might look a bit like grass to the untrained eye,
Right.
but structurally they are totally different. They don't form continuous suffocating mats.
Right, whereas grass forms a turf. It weaves this dense layer directly over the soil.
Precisely. And if you are a 50-gram bird trying to run for your life, pushing through a dense mat of grass requires immense physical effort.
Compared to just darting between the rigid, well-spaced clumps of Arestio.
Exactly. So when fire return intervals decrease, meaning fires happen way too frequently, which is often due to human negligence.
Like starting fires by accident.
Yes. The slow-growing restios and proteas are eradicated, they don't have time to recover, and aggressive grasses invade the space.
And the moment the understory shifts to grass...
The buttonquail is physically locked out of the habitat. They cannot function in grass.
Wow. So they're essentially surfing this 2 to 5 year wave of post-fire succession, constantly staying one step ahead of the overgrowth.
It's a very stressful existence, ecologically speaking.
I can imagine. And if your home has a mandatory expiration date of basically 36 months, you cannot afford a slow, leisurely reproductive cycle.
No, you absolutely cannot.
You need some kind of evolutionary hack to just pump out as many offspring as possible before the canopy closes in on you.
Which brings us right back to that reversed sexual dimorphism we talked about at the start.
Oh, right. The colorful females and the drab males.
Yes. The ecological pressure of a rapidly expiring habitat is the catalyst for their polyandrous breeding system.
Polyandrous meaning one female, multiple males.
Correct. Because in a standard monogamous avian model, the female lays eggs, and then both parents spend weeks incubating and then weeks rearing the chicks.
Right.
The time investment per clutch is massive.
But the female Fynbos buttonquail operates more like a biological assembly line.
That's a great way to put it. She is the larger, brightly colored bird.
Mm-hmm.
She goes out and establishes the territory in a prime 3-year-old burn patch.
And she utilizes this deep, resonant hooting call to claim the space and summon the males.
Yes, a vocalization, I should add, that is notoriously difficult to actually document in the field.
Why is that? Is it just too quiet?
Well, it resonates at a frequency that carries very well through low brush, but observers often confuse it with the call of the co-occurring striped flufftail.
Oh.
Or, honestly, they simply dismiss it as wind noise blowing through the restios.
Oh.
It's very subtle.
But once a male does hear it and enters the territory, they mate. She lays a clutch of 2 to 5 eggs.
And then she abandons them.
Just leaves.
She just leaves. She delegates the entire process to the camouflaged male. He incubates the eggs for 12 to 14 days, and he completely handles the rearing of the chicks.
So they really are stay-at-home dads.
They absolutely are. And while he's doing that, the female immediately moves on, hoots for a new male, and starts another clutch.
That is a brilliant evolutionary hack for a bird that lives on borrowed time.
It is hyper-efficient.
Mm-hmm.
By outsourcing the weeks of stationary incubation and that really vulnerable chick rearing phase to multiple males, a single female can theoretically produce 3, 4, or even 5 clutches in a single breeding season.
Wow. And the breeding season peaks around October, right?
Yes. Usually September to December, but October is the peak. She is basically extracting maximum reproductive value from that temporary Fynbos patch before it becomes unlivable.
It's an incredible adaptation for time management, but it has to come with terrifying vulnerabilities, right?
Okay, absolutely.
Because they are terrestrial. They don't build these intricate woven nests up in the safety of a tree canopy.
No, not at all. The nest is literally a ground scrape.
A ground scrape. It sounds so exposed.
It barely qualifies as a nest in the traditional sense, honestly. It is just a shallow depression scratched right into the bare dirt.
Wow.
Sometimes they might sparsely line it with a few pieces of dry grass, and it's usually tucked under a small, low-hanging shrub, or maybe against a restio clump. But that's it.
So you basically have eggs sitting directly on the soil in an ecosystem that I'm assuming is just crawling with snakes and small mammals.
It is heavily populated with predators. The entire defense apparatus relies entirely on the male remaining perfectly still.
He just has to trust his camouflage.
He has to trust that his streaked, straw-colored plumage makes him completely invisible to a passing predator.
That extreme vulnerability is what makes confirming their breeding behavior nearly impossible for researchers, right?
Exactly.
Because we know they breed, obviously, but seeing it happen is a completely different story.
It's incredibly rare.
Which is what makes the Nui Jar's wetlands sighting so crucial. I really want to talk about this part of the source material.
Oh, that account from the Overberg Crane Group is a landmark observation.
It happened in early November, right? They were driving through this really specialized, critically endangered vegetation type.
Yes, the Elam ferrocrete Fynbos. It's located near the very southern tip of the continent.
Right. And this team of conservationists, they actually flushed an adult buttonquail while driving.
Yeah, and it did the standard 30-meter flutter and dropped.
And most observers would just log that flush and keep driving, right?
99% of people would just say, cool, saw a buttonquail, and move on. But one of the board members, Mick Dalton, he noticed this microscopic movement exactly where the adult had just launched from.
Oh, wow.
So he actually got out, investigated the ground scrape, and he found 2 tiny chicks just sitting on the dirt.
Sitting right there on the open dirt.
Just waiting perfectly still. Now, turnacid chicks are what we call precocial.
Precocial, meaning they can move around right away.
Exactly. They hatch with downy feathers, and they are capable of leaving the nest relatively quickly. But their initial instinctual defense is absolute immobility.
They just freeze.
They freeze, and their down is modeled to look exactly like the surrounding pebbles and dry leaf litter.
So spotting them against the really chaotic visual noise of that ferrocrete soil.
It requires an incredibly trained eye. You basically have to know exactly what you were looking for, and even then you might miss it.
And they took photos, right?
Yes. They took a few rapid photographs and then immediately withdrew so they wouldn't disturb them, allowing the male to return.
But when they circulated those images, something crazy happened.
It really did. Leading ornithologists in South Africa confirmed that they were totally unaware of any prior photographs existing of wild Fynbos buttonquail chicks.
Like anywhere.
Anywhere. Think about the gravity of that. We have a species that is globally recognized as endangered or near threatened, depending on the specific list, and we essentially lacked photographic proof of their offspring until a chance encounter on a dirt road.
That is just wild to me.
It highlights the central diagnostic nightmare of this bird.
Right, because how do you construct a reliable conservation model for a species you can barely prove exists on a day-to-day basis?
You really can't use standard methods. You cannot execute point counts, which is standing in one place and counting what you see.
Because they won't move.
Exactly. And you cannot set up acoustic monitors because their calls are so rare and so easily confused with wind or other birds.
Which brings us to the mechanics of the flush survey.
Oh, yes. The flush survey.
Because to find this bird, you basically have to force it to break its evolutionary programming, right? You have to make it fly.
You leave it no other choice.
And the Fitzpatrick Institute study, led by Alan Lee and his team, mapped out 275 kilometers of survey lines to do exactly this.
Yes, they did.
But reading the sources, this is not a hike. It sounds like a highly tactical, mathematically regimented sweep.
It is exhausting. The physical and psychological toll of a flush survey is immense.
I mean, I can't even imagine.
Because you are not walking on a flat, cleared trail. You are navigating highly uneven, rocky, mountainous terrain.
Right.
You are physically pushing your body through 70-centimeter high, stiff, resistant vegetation.
While the sun is just beating down on you.
Exactly. And you can't just enjoy the view. You are staring at the ground immediately in front of your boots for hours on end, just waiting for an explosion of feathers.
Yeah. So, to summarize for you listening, if you want to see this bird, you can't just go for a quiet nature walk with your binoculars.
Definitely not.
You literally need to assemble an Avengers-style tactical squad of at least 5 people.
5 people minimum.
Yeah, and sweep the brush like you're looking for a lost diamond.
That's a very accurate description.
And your reward for all of this is a 3-second glimpse of a brown blur. Is it any wonder we don't know exactly how many are left?
It really isn't. And the researchers actually discovered a hard mathematical floor for detection during those surveys.
Right, the 5-person rule.
Yes. If you have 2 people or 3 people or 4 people walking a line through the Fynbos, you will find nothing.
Nothing at all.
They recorded 0 encounters with teams smaller than 5 people.
0. That is a crazy statistic. Why does a 4-person team fail?
Let's analyze the geometry of it. The study mandated a maximum spacing of exactly 5 meters between observers.
Okay, so 5 meters apart.
So if you have a team of 4, you cover a 15-meter wide swath of land. But the buttonquail is highly, highly sensitive to the vector of approach.
It's watching how you walk.
It is tracking the gaps. If they perceive a gap in the line, or if the space between you and the next researcher slips to, say, 6 or 7 meters.
Because someone drifted slightly while walking?
Exactly. You dodge a rock, you drift right. The bird will simply sit tight in that gap. It will let the humans walk right past it, relying entirely on its camouflage, and it will never flush.
So you literally have to build a human dragnet.
A flawless human dragnet. A 5-person team, spaced exactly 5 meters apart, covers enough continuous ground to convince the bird that it is about to be physically stepped on.
You have to completely remove the option of sitting tight.
Yes. You force the panic. And when it finally breaks cover, like we said, the interaction lasts maybe 3 seconds.
It flutters 30 meters, drops, and vanishes.
Right. Now, occasionally, if the survey team is highly disciplined, they can quickly pivot, walk a wide circle around the exact drop zone, and attempt to collapse that circle to force a second flush.
To get a positive identification.
Exactly. But honestly, often the bird has already scuttled 20 meters away under the canopy by the time the team even reaches the drop zone.
They are that fast on the ground.
They are incredibly fast.
Now, if someone listening is really determined to attempt this, the sources do indicate some specific geographical hotspots, right?
I do. The absolute prime location is the Cape of Good Hope Preserve, right at the tip of the Cape Peninsula.
Okay, what makes that spot so good?
It features this large plateau of Restio-dominated Fynbos, and crucially, it's exposed to frequent natural fires.
Ah, so it maintains that early successional state they need.
Exactly. Other good sites include the Potberg Slopes and the De Hoop Nature Reserve, Sir Lowry's Pass, and some of the private nature reserves near Struisby on the Agulhas Plain.
But going back to the data for a second, the extreme difficulty of this flush survey, that's the key to unlocking that massive discrepancy in the population estimates, isn't it?
It is the entire key to the mystery. Why did the IUCN estimate fewer than 1,000 birds, while the Fitzpatrick model suggested 89,000.
Right. It basically comes down to a master class in detection probability versus carrying capacity.
Exactly. Historically, birders were submitting casual observation data to citizen science projects, like the Southern African Bird Atlas Project.
Which is great data normally.
It's fantastic for most species. But casual birders walk on trails. They walk in small groups or alone.
And as we just learned, if you aren't marching a 5-person dragnet through trackless brush,
your encounter rate is functionally zero. So when that casual data goes into the IUCN models, it looks like a species on the absolute brink of extinction.
Because the birds simply weren't showing up in the records.
Right. But when Dr. Lee's team deployed these highly regimented flush surveys across 275 kilometers of targeted habitat, they started finding them.
They proved the birds were actually there. The historical methodology was just structurally flawed for this specific species.
Completely flawed. And when the researchers crunched the numbers from the successful flushes, they calculated a density of roughly 0.032 individuals per hectare.
In optimal 2 to 5-year-old Fynbos.
Exactly.
And here's where the math gets a little bit speculative, according to the sources.
It does get tricky here.
Because they took that density, 0.032 birds per hectare, and they basically multiplied it across the total square kilometer area of theoretically suitable Fynbos habitat left in the Cape.
Right. And that carrying capacity model is what generates that massive 89,000 figure.
But we have to apply extreme caution to that extrapolation, don't we?
We absolutely do. Because just because a satellite map shows a patch of Fynbos, it doesn't mean the microhabitat is actually suitable on the ground.
Right. It might look like Fynbos from space, but it could be too grassy underneath.
Or it might be degraded by factors invisible from space. In fact, more recent, conservative reassessments adjusting for the actual area of occupancy.
Area occupancy meaning the areas we actually know they inhabit.
Right, rather than areas they could theoretically inhabit. That adjustment brings the plausible population estimate down drastically.
Down to what?
Closer to 15,000 individuals.
Wow. A drop from 89,000 to 15,000 is a terrifying statistical correction.
It is. It's a massive reduction.
But it really underscores the fragility of their existence. Because while finding a Fynbos buttonquail is just a logistical nightmare for a biologist, surviving the next 20 years is becoming an absolute ecological nightmare for the bird itself.
It is incredibly grim. They are habitat specialists in a biome that is currently under systematic assault from multiple overlapping angles.
Let's talk about those threats, because the most pervasive one across the Cape right now is invasive alien vegetation, right?
Yes. We're dealing with tree species that were imported from Australia and Europe centuries ago.
For timber, mostly.
For timber and also for dune stabilization. We're talking primarily about acacias, pines, and eucalyptus trees.
But how exactly does an Australian acacia destroy a buttonquail habitat? I mean, it's a tree. Is it just taking up physical space?
It's way worse than that. It actually alters the foundational chemistry of the biome itself.
Oh, really? How?
Well, Fynbos is defined by its nutrient-poor soils. Native plants have evolved specifically to thrive in low nitrogen, low phosphorus environments.
Okay, so they like the bad soil.
Right, but Australian acacias like the Port Jackson willow or the roycrans, they are what we call nitrogen fixers.
Meaning what, exactly?
They have symbiotic bacteria in their roots that physically pull nitrogen directly from the atmosphere and pump it into the soil.
Oh, wow. So they're essentially fertilizing a landscape that is allergic to fertilizer.
That is exactly what they're doing. They enrich the soil, which sounds positive to a farmer, but in the Fynbos, it allows aggressive, non-native weeds and grasses to suddenly invade.
And we know what grass does.
Right. It outcompetes the highly specialized, slow-growing restios and proteas, and it locks the buttonquail out.
And what about the pine trees?
Pine trees have a different mechanic, but it's just as destructive. They drop these incredibly dense carpets of acidic needles.
Oh, I've seen that in pine forests. It's like a thick brown mat.
Yes, and this acidic mat physically chokes the soil surface. It totally prevents native Fynbos seeds from germinating.
And it probably completely destroys those bare dirt runways the buttonquail relies on to scuttle around.
It covers them entirely. Plus, invasive trees grow very rapidly, forming a high canopy that blocks sunlight from reaching the understory. So in a heavily infested area, the early successional Fynbos simply ceases to exist.
The habitat is biologically erased.
Completely erased.
And where the alien trees haven't taken over, human development is basically bulldozing whatever is left in the lowlands.
Coastal Fynbos is incredibly vulnerable to agricultural conversion. Farmers are plowing vast tracts of land right now to plant canola for oil.
And ironically, rooibos tea.
Yes. Rooibos is actually a native Fynbos plant. But when it is cultivated commercially, it is grown in sterile, plowed monocultures.
Right, they clear everything else out.
And a plowed field offers zero structural cover and zero complex foraging for a ground-dwelling bird. It's useless to them.
So agriculture is eating the habitat, but then we have to return to that complicated dynamic of fire we talked about earlier.
Yes, the fire issue is very tricky.
Because the bird is basically caught in this dual threat scenario regarding how humans manage fire. On one hand, near human settlements and agricultural borders, there's really aggressive fire suppression.
Naturally, people want to protect their property.
So fires are extinguished as quickly as possible.
But when you suppress fire in the Fynbos, the vegetation just ages right past that crucial 5-year window. It becomes a senescent 80% basal cover thicket.
So the buttonquail is locked out by the very flora it depends on, just because it got too old.
Exactly. That's the first half of the fire story.
In the second half.
Conversely, up in the remote mountain catchments, fires are occurring far, far too frequently.
Because of climate change.
Climate change is driving longer, hotter droughts. Absolutely. And human negligence often provides the ignition.
So when a mountain slope burns every 2 or 3 years, instead of every 12 to 15 years?
The slow-maturing native plants are completely exhausted. They cannot produce seed before the next fire hits.
They just give up.
The ecosystem collapses. And what replaces it? A simplified grassy state.
And as the Fitzpatrick data proved, an increase in grass cover causes a direct crash in buttonquail encounters.
Yes. They vanish.
So, just to recap this nightmare scenario,
Yep.
you have a habitat that is shrinking from invasive nitrogen, acidic pine mats, canola fields, fire suppression, and fire overexposure.
It's a miracle they exist at all.
It really is. But even if a buttonquail manages to find a pristine 3-year-old patch of restios, it faces an entirely new wave of threats operating right on the ground with it.
The predator dynamic.
Right, because the predator dynamic in the Fynbos has been fundamentally broken by humans.
It really has. Over the last century, agricultural persecution and just general habitat fragmentation have largely eradicated the apex predators from the Fynbos Mountains.
Like the Cape Mountain leopard.
Exactly. The Cape Mountain leopard is functionally absent from vast swaths of its historical range.
Which triggers something called mesopredator release.
Yes.
I saw this in the sources. Think of it like a corporate structure, right?
Okay, let's hear the analogy.
If you remove the executive board, the apex predator is like the leopard, the middle management suddenly has no oversight and no one keeping their ambitions in check.
Right.
So they just take over the company and their numbers explode.
That is an excellent mechanical analogy. Without leopards or large eagles to control them, the mid-level predators, the mesopredators, experience a massive population boom.
And in the Fynbos, who are the middle managers.
This means an unnatural overabundance of caracals and Cape gray mongooses.
And more devastatingly, human expansion brings a constant influx of domestic and feral cats right into the ecosystem.
The feral cats are a massive issue.
Because feral cats are the ultimate, highly efficient terrestrial hunters. And what is their ideal prey?
A 50-gram ground-dwelling bird that refuses to fly and literally sits on a nest built on bare dirt.
It's like serving them on a platter. The buttonquail is utilizing an evasion strategy evolved over millennia to hide from native raptors swooping from the sky.
Right, it's completely unprepared for a surging population of mammalian predators systematically sweeping the ground floor.
It has no defense against a cat.
None at all. And the compounding effect of all these multi-tiered threats, the habitat loss, the fires, the cats, it is starkly evident in the regional data.
Yeah, the Southern African Bird Atlas Project maps are showing some really deeply concerning local extinctions.
They're leaking out across the map.
The sources specifically highlight the greater cedar bird region in the north. They have effectively vanished from there entirely.
Which is interesting, is the Fynbos in the High Cedarburg is actually still relatively intact structurally.
Oh, really? Then why did they leave?
Well, it is the most arid extreme of their range. Researchers suspect that climate change-driven aridification has simply pushed the moisture levels below the threshold required to sustain the invertebrate populations the bird feeds on.
Oh, so it just got too dry for their food source.
Exactly. They starved out.
And they have also disappeared from Maconda in the far east of their historical distribution, right?
Because they have. But perhaps the most alarming data point of all comes from the Cape Peninsula itself.
Right, in Cape Town's backyard.
Exactly. In 1995, surveys recorded them as the third most common bird in the Restio Fynbos of the peninsula.
The third most common.
Yes. Today, encounters are exceedingly rare.
That is a staggering drop in just a few decades.
It mirrors the decline of other Fynbos endemics with poor flight capacity, actually.
Like what?
Like the Victorins warbler, which is also being systematically squeezed out by habitat degradation and that feral cat population spilling over from Cape Town's urban edge.
It just paints a picture of a species walking an agonizingly thin ecological tightrope.
Agonizingly thin.
I mean, think about the cascading sequence of events required for just one of these birds to survive right now. A specific patch of mountainside must burn.
Right.
It must receive enough rain to sprout restios, but not so much rain that aggressive grass takes over.
Exactly.
A female must find that exact patch within a narrow 36-month window. She has to locate a male, lay her eggs on bare dirt,
and then hope that for 2 straight weeks of incubation, an unnaturally dense population of mongooses and feral cats magically fails to walk past that specific shrub.
It sounds impossible when you lay it all out like that.
It illustrates exactly why conservation for these kind of hyperspecialists is such a monumental task. You can't simply draw a line on a map, declare an area a nature reserve, and assume the species is magically protected.
Because the environment is not static.
Right. You have to actively engineer the landscape. You have to physically go out and hack down the alien acacias and pines to restore the soil chemistry.
You have to intentionally set controlled burns at highly specific intervals just to reset the successional clock.
Exactly. And you have to actively suppress the mesopredator populations. You are essentially managing the mechanics of the entire biome, top to bottom, just to keep one invisible bird from blinking out of existence.
It is a staggering amount of effort directed at an animal most people will never, ever see.
It really is.
But I think that is really the core insight of this whole deep dive today. We started this conversation talking about a tiny bird that completely flips the evolutionary script on gender roles.
Right, with the bright females defending turf, while the camouflaged males incubate eggs in the dirt.
And we unpacked its absolute reliance on the violent destruction of the Fynbos wildfire, how it rides this tiny 2 to 5 year wave of regrowth.
And fleeing under the cover of darkness when the vegetation grows too thick to navigate.
And of course, we confronted the reality that proving this bird even exists requires assembling a tactical human dragnet to force a 3-second glimpse of a brown blur.
Which is just incredible.
Understanding the natural world isn't always about clean data and easy observations. Sometimes it's about recognizing the intricate, hyper-specialized mechanisms that tie an organism to a really volatile environment.
And acknowledging that when we humans introduce an Australian tree or suppress a natural fire to protect a house, we are fundamentally altering the structural physics of an ecosystem.
Often with cascading consequences for species we don't even know are there.
Exactly.
We began this investigation by talking about the desire for precision, the comfort of looking at a savanna and easily counting the elephants. The Fynbos buttonquail survives entirely by denying us that comfort. It is an absolute masterclass in hiding in plain sight.
Beautifully said.
But it leaves us with a really lingering question, and this is what I want you listening to think about today.
Okay.
If a single species has evolved to be so perfectly undetectable that our most advanced scientific models can swing wildly by tens of thousands of individuals, how many other complex, secret lives are playing out entirely unnoticed in the brush beneath our feet?
That's a profound thought.
And more importantly, as we continue to aggressively pave over wild spaces or systematically suppress the terrifying necessary fires that these ancient environments require to hit the reset button, are we inadvertently extinguishing entire worlds of highly adapted specialists before we even figure out how to count them?